Hello, everyone. Today I am talking from the year 2016. Ooh, hello from the past. I mean, part of it, not the whole thing, but part of my mind is back on 2016. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another casual conversation with me, your friend Carlz, where I take whatever I say in Spanish and I try to make it sense in English, which sometimes is easier, sometimes it's harder. I found myself getting way more passionate when talking in Spanish. I don't know why. I feel more, what can you say, like, not constrained, not limited. Even though my English is far from perfect, I don't feel limited by it, you know? But at the same time, it doesn't feel like something that generates this passion. I guess when you have a pool of language, wink wink, when you have a bigger pool of language, perhaps you get a desire to express even more things. You know, like your pool has a lot of more things. But the thing with language, even though it's a tool, it's far from being the perfect tool, because language, as we all know, it's a code. So a code has a part that you see, a part you understand, so before getting all too complicated about it, like, you can't just go around saying shit and expecting everyone to understand your shit. So that's why language is imperfect. Well, language is part of today's episode and today's movies, or this week's movies. So let me take you through a trip, as I said, to 2016, when I heard for the first time the name Denis Villeneuve, now a Hollywood staple, and this sci-fi. Back then, I didn't see it in theaters or anything. I saw it later when it started making the rounds and people were talking about it. And he made a critically acclaimed sci-fi movie called Arrival. So this is gonna be a spoilery episode. I don't really see. I mean, yeah, I'm just gonna spoil it whenever I need to. These are not movies easy to talk about without spoiling it. But anyways, for those of you who don't know, Arrival is literally the story of aliens or extraterrestrial life forms arriving to Earth. They arrive in this weirdly shape. They look like mouse, like computer mouse starships. They arrive, and of course they create a great commotion. And the protagonist, played by Amy Adams, she's a linguist, so she's an expert in languages, and they bring her in to possibly communicate with these alien life forms or extraterrestrial life forms, in order to understand their motives, what they're doing on Earth, and ultimately to decide whether we want to fuck them up or not fuck them up. Anyways, it's a great movie. The acting is great, the designs are great. But back in 2016, there was one thing that had the biggest impact on me as a viewer. And as I said on last week's episode, I'm in that sort of little space where I'm mostly doing this focus on self, on the inner self, not only in me as a person, but me as a viewer, and how movies reflect your state of mind, your state of mind, or like your emotional state. That was the expression I was looking for. How they reflect it, and how that state can change what you think about movies. So back in 2016, I have no issue, or like I feel no shame on saying that I cried my eyes out at Arrival, but it wasn't because of what happened to the protagonist. As the years go by, I even forgot how the movie ended. What broke my heart during my first viewing of Arrival was how society reacted to it. It was overwhelming to see how the political interests of the superpowers they come into conflict and they wanna get an intelligence advantage on it, and the movie is really explicit about it, not only in how politics would develop in this type of first contact scenario, but how they break down and ultimately how they fail, how society fails. You have this scene in Arrival where they have a big screen and different intelligence agencies, or like military, I'm not quite sure what they are, but like different cells of that, or like organizations throughout the world, they are all together in this room trying to figure out what the fuck are we supposed to do with these creatures or with the situation. They are cooperating. And of course, spoilers, all of this eventually breaks down to the interests of each country and to the interests of particular individuals and the like never-ending struggle for power in this neoliberal hellhole that we live in. And that back in 2016 just felt awful. It felt fucking awful. And that was the memory I had of the movie. So, that very same year, not exactly that year, but like between that year, between then and before, I ran into Cosmos by Carl Sagan, the probably the most famous science show of all time. And then after all the critical acclaim that Arrival had, it was inevitable to run into Contact by Robert Zemeckis, starring Jodie Foster. It's a movie based on, I don't remember if it was a script of a book wrote by Carl Sagan. And people were quick to point out the similarities on the movies, which they are. In Contact, this scientist, she founds a signal coming from a way outer space. So there's no spaceships or aliens. It's way less explicit, therefore more sciency, more contemplative, and she gets this signal. And the whole movie is about them dealing with this signal, whether it's true, and then they decode it, then they find the secret message in it, and then turns out the message gives you the instructions to build how do you call it, like an intergalactic device or some kind. So it's just basically this big ball that is capable to travel through space and time to faraway galaxies. Okay, so I watched Contact after Arrival, and even though these political elements that I found to be so overwhelming in Arrival are all there, played by controversial actor James Wood, amongst other things. In Contact, the way the Contact is made is way more explicit. I don't wanna like say that this is a bad thing, or I don't wanna sound that I'm demeaning the movie, but it's way more obvious. It's way more explicit. To me, probably the most memorable scene in Contact is when Jodie Foster's character is returning to the like base where they have the big satellite thingies, like receiving these messages. And after the news that they have received this outer space signal, a bunch of people gather outside the base, and they do this scene which is almost cartoonish, because she's going through like the road inside of her car, right? And she's seeing all of these segments of people reacting to this in different manners. So she sees, for example, like religious people going like, "This is a sign of God" or whatever, like, and right next to them, hippies, like, "Oh, free, like freedom," like, and then next to them, like, ET enthusiasts, and they're like, "ET, go home, take me." So she sees a bunch of caricatures, basically, of reactions that would occur in real life to this uh, realistic scenario. And the way it's shot and the way it's shown is so cartoonish, it's so ridiculous that back then in 2016 I was like, yeah, this is way too obvious. Like, I don't really need that. But anyways, Contact develops like a more traditional movie. It's more like quiet. It's more like grounded, ironically. And here's the thing: I lived with that memory of those movies, having this strong emotional connection for Arrival. Whereas uh, I thought that Contact was beautiful. I really loved it back then as well, but I didn't get that impact, even though I love Carl Sagan and everything. So jump into the present, and something made me remember of particularly Contact. I think it was one of Carl Sagan's anniversaries or something like that. And like, well, he's a scientist that is often being brought up nowadays. I was gonna say 10 years ago, no more like 2016, like 9 years ago, right? 2015, yeah. He's a scientist that gets brought up quite often because nowadays we live in like a dystopian reality where it's not like science doesn't matter, but in a popular level, like in a mainstream level, science is something that we sort of use it when it's convenient. You know, people, those of us that are not scientists, but we vouch for it and we believe in it. Not that there's something to believe in science; is just is, right? You don't believe in facts; they are just facts. But it's not really as prominent as you would think. So he gets brought up quite often, which made me think about these movies, made me think about 2016, and made me think about this crazy balance of reactions between two movies which are quite similar. What is the problem with their similarities? Is that despite them being so similar, there is a point in each of these movies where they deviate like enormously, like day and night. Something that I didn't really struggle to understand back on 2016. It was just like a visceral reaction to both of them. And the visceral reaction was stronger for Arrival, therefore I remember more of it. But here's the thing: in every, or like most of science fiction project or stories, there's always this point where the science and the fiction just break away. It's like you get all of this science base, you get this ground, because that is how science fiction works, right? You get this science ground to make the story believable, to make it more easy to understand. And if you can imagine that, because it's true. But then at some point you deviate or explode or explore like topics that are, even though they might be slightly based on science, they are way out there. And that is what makes a science fiction story a story, right? In the case of Arrival, they managed to kind of like decode the octopods, I think they call the creatures during the movie. They decode their language, and this is literally the climax of the movie. Turns out that by understanding their language, they give you a quote unquote gift. And this gift was allowing you to think in a non-linear time way. That's correct, right? Like they allow you to think non-linearly, time-wise, and you go like, wow, how the fuck does that work? It's not really explained. It just is. So Amy Adams' character learns the language, and turns out all the flashbacks you've been seeing throughout the movies are not her past, which seems to be like way, but is her future, a future in which she has a daughter, and she lives all of her daughter's life at the same time, which ends up tragically, by the way. So by the end of Arrival, it's really hard not to feel it like it's more like a character study. It's really, how can you say it, prohibitive, exclusive. Like it's not easy to empathize with Amy Adams' character when she gets this like free time revelation. And rewatching this movie now made me realize that it sort of changed all of my focus to that part, to the end of the movie. And this is something really strange and unique to me and my perspective and the way my life has changed. The thing that impacted me the most back in 2016, now in 2025, felt like nothing, which was the whole political and societal elements or factors. Like, you see that now, and it's sort of like a moot point. It really is. It really is. It's like you already know all of this is going to happen. I couldn't help but feel like defeated. Like hopeless. Hopeless, yeah. Like, why would that impact me? Why would that affect me? I know that's how it's going to happen. Like, it's funny. It doesn't even frustrate me anymore. Years are gonna go by, and as far as we know, this is exactly how a first context scenario is gonna happen. You see the political reality and landscape of today, and you know that is going to happen. Politicians being politicians, looking for their own interest, selfishness, conflict, egos. And ironically, that is one of the elements that you see almost verbatim, is the word, right? Yeah, but that is not the word that I want to use. But those are elements that you see both in Contact and Arrival. Like the societal reaction. And Contact is from like 1997. So think about it, how we jump in time, and all we see as permanent is our inability to do this thing right. Is the fact that when this shit happens, it's not an if, it's when. Maybe we'll be like extinct as a species when it eventually happens, but when it does happen, this is how it's gonna happen. Egos, selfishness, dumb shit, religious bullshit, violence. That is what's going to happen. and it just stopped. Just stopped caring for it. I've given up, as the Linkin Park song says. I just stop. It just doesn't phase me anymore. I'm completely numb to it. Another Linkin Park song. So what does this change on personal perspective achieved? Or what did it mean for my movies enjoyment? Which, by the way, both of them I still do enjoy. It pushed me to focus on this, the fiction turn in the science fiction story. So that is the turn in Arrival, right? Amy Adams being capable of like thinking in a non-linear time way. Okay, so what is the turn in Contact? Contact, now that I stop caring for that other shit, Contact's turn into fiction is way more interesting. Way, way, way more interesting. And here is why. Contact does a couple of really smart things. One, it adds the element of faith, which in a really surprising way, Arrival does not. It's curious, like think about it. Like in Arrival, there's no real character or plot element that deals with the element of faith, which is a fucking key element, like in our society. It just is. And for some reason, Arrival doesn't do that, but Contact does. And it does so not only as part of the main plot, but as part of its climax, as part of the movie's final conclusion. So Contact's turn into the fiction comes after they built this intergalactic pod. Right, they build that shit, and Jodie Foster's character get into this sphere thing, and she gets through like a wormhole type, and she travels galaxies and galaxies. She travels to like unknown by now parts of space, and she has what could be called like an experience. She has an experience with a sentient being of another galaxy. And this is like the shortest experience ever. And all this entity tells her is that they exist. You know, all it does is like giving her this, and watch out for this word, a revelation. They give her a revelation, a sort of like mind and eye opening of her reality. They confirm to her that we are not alone in space. They confirm what we mathematically know, is that like there's a high, well, not that high, but there's a probability of more sentient beings being out there. They confirm that to her. But here's the catch, and here's the brilliant catch they do in Contact. They confirm it only to her, and then they send her back without any tangible proof. This is a stroke of brilliance, because then she came back, and of course they challenge her, and they go like, yeah, you're a scientist, right? You're a scientist, and you are asking us to believe you. You are asking us to believe you. You are asking us to have faith in what you're saying. And here the message gets entertaining. So she asked them to believe in her, because what she has to say would change the world for the better. You know, she's like, we should accept that we are not alone in the universe, and that would make our problems more relative. And that is something that this is not the first time you'll see that in movies or in fiction. If you could only accept that your problems are relative, you can downplay it, and like you can stop being such a hard ass on things that aren't really that important. You could reach more agreements. You could be more welcoming to others. You know, all of these neo-fascist movies or movements around the world, like that, they care for shit like, oh, there's only two genders, or like, you know, or like, all of that shit would be pointless. You know, why would you care that there are only two genres if I can prove to you that there are aliens without any genre that you know on Earth? It would prove you that you're a fucking moron, and that spending way too much of your, like, quote unquote brain power into like just defending the fact that there are only two genres because the fucking Bible said it would be pointless. Even the Bible would be pointless. You know, of course, I think probably Jehovah's Witnesses would be the first ones to solve it. Like if they found like life in outer space and like different civilizations, I bet they would be the first one to jump in and say like, yeah, but they just God, this is the same God. They created the same God. And then if we manage to talk with them and they would like, God who? We don't know that shit. Jehovah's Witness would be like, because you haven't had the revelation yet, but he is there for you. Like, okay, you know, that sort of bullshit. But anyways, contact challenges us to think that way. And this is so smart because you can't prove it. Even though you can scientifically believe it, intergalactic travel and everything, and like existence in other galaxies, you can't prove it. So even if you are a scientist, what you ask of people are not their knowledge or like their reasoning. That you don't ask them for their rational acceptance of your theories. You're asking them for their faith. You're asking them to believe in another human being and on an idea that will challenge and probably destroy much of their nearsighted and close-minded ideas for the sake and betterment of us all. But it would be on faith, not on science. And in that brilliant final scene where a young, strappy, sexy, what's his name? What's the name of the alright guy? Matthew McConaughey. They ask him, Matthew McConaughey, because they use him in the movie as a representative of faith. They ask him, like, do you believe her? Like, she goes against your belief in God. And he says something of the sort of like, this is my chance to believe in people. You know, that doesn't mean that I don't believe in my God, but it's my chance to believe in people, and I chose to believe in her. I chose to believe in people. And that shit is beautiful. So let's go back to the comparison. Back then, in 2016, I saw that, and I thought, okay, that's fine. But I didn't think it was necessary. I didn't think that sort of analysis or that sort of argument would be the sort of argument that you would need to show people to move them and to make them grow out of these movies. You better show them the politics side. Open their eyes, open their eyes, open their eyes to the creepiness of politics. But now, in 2025, I feel that is useless. And I got into this reflection, or like why they keep using reflection. That is not the way to say it in English. When you reflect on something, that is weird, because you can say like you reflect on something as you're thinking on something, but when you say I do a reflection, that is not the same as in Spanish. But when you think deeply about something, I got into this clash between both movies' climaxes, and I got into this conclusion that Contact's message is more important, it's transcendental, because Contact's message is a question, it's a challenge, inquiry to you as a viewer that transcends for the future. But Arrival's ending is not. It's not. Because it's harder to be to empathize with Amy Adams' character, and not only that, it's harder to understand what would it mean for you to think in a non-linear time-wise way. There have been another works of fiction that propose similar scenarios. I always remember Dr. Manhattan in Watchmen, and I love the concept of someone being able to tell the future and the past just by being so fucking smart, which is the plausible way of understanding, like being able to predict the future. You know, there's only so many permutations a thing can go, and if you have the mind power and the mind capacity of seeing all of these permutations and seeing as many variables as possible, you can in a way predict the future. But if you tell me that learning this language would allow you to think in a non-linear way, that is complete BS. Even more so in the movie, she writes a book about how to understand it, and then she publishes the book. So in theory, you have a future in Arrival where you have a bunch of people thinking in a non-linear way. And of course, the message of the movie, as are most of the Villeneuve movies, is like this personal introspection and this trip into the suffering of humanity, because she needs to choose her life even though she knows it leads to tragedy. So in the end, she chooses the tragedy of her life for the value of the parts that weren't tragic. Like life sucks, right? We all know that, but it's worth it for the good parts. That's kind of like the thing. But it's really hard to expand that. It's really hard to make that transcend. If I go around telling everyone, yeah, just enjoy the good parts of life, man, cheers, you know, they'll be like, okay. But it's like if I go around asking them, like, Contact, what is the true meaning of faith, and not only in faith in things that are out there like God and such, but to believe in people. What does that really mean? You know, it's a more transcendental but like useful question that Contact does, as opposed to Arrival, which is more personal and more like just for the character. That's why I forgotten the movie's ending, and after this many years, because it seems like it just was going to happen to Amy Adams' character, and no way in hell is going to happen to me. Of course, you can challenge and like grab a little bit of the nuances in here. But the more I think about it, the more I still see them limited to her experience. As I said, if I boil it down to just enjoy life because life sucks anyways, but the good parts are worth living, you can say that's not what the movie is about. But that is not a challenging thought, even though it might be a heartwarming thought, even though it might be something that it's completely worth thinking and believing and holding on to. God, no pun intended, God knows we need it, like in almost every day of our lives, to hold on to the good parts of this hellhole that we created for ourselves, by the way. Like that hellish landscape that we created outside of our windows. Well, depending on where you live, it might look even more hellish. At least in my case, it looks like fucking hell, you know? Concrete, stress, proletariat hustling, and hatred among us. That's why faith just comes as a lifeboat, you know? You have like the fucking Mormons working around, and if you have streets littered with garbage, like poorly kept with stressed out people and pollution and everything, and among them you see these islands of salvation. You know, you have the Jehovah's Witness standing in the corner, like offering you salvation. You have like the fucking Mormons walking around like lifeboats. Of course they're gonna exploit that, you know. Of course they do. But if you go back to these movies and you go back to their teachings and you go back to what they're saying, you gotta ask yourself which one of these is more useful. At least I do. Because these are my lifeboats. These are my peace of minds. Human art and human creativity. You know, I don't need no fucking Atalaya or like whatever they call that, the Jehovah's Witness book in English, or like the fucking gold plates of that fucking moron from the Mormons that fucking lost the fucking tablets. I don't need that shit. This is what I need. Human creativity, human emotions, human ideas. Therefore, when I see these movies, I go back to them and I think about them again. And I get drawn into what they're trying to say and what they're trying to convey. And even though from 2016 to 2025, movies like Arrival have changed, because I have changed and the things I care about society-wise have changed, the movie is still awesome. It's still a work of art. Even though it might be just a human tragedy at its core, you know, Hamlet type, whatever. And I still love Contact, because it uses human ingenuity in a fiction setting to ask important questions. And it offers you not answers, it offers you guidelines on how to develop your own answer to those questions. Just don't forget all the necessary and important elements that are participant of that, like faith. You know? So now in 2025, I gotta say I like Contact more. You know? The whole conclusion of this is like, rewatch your movies, man. Even if you liked it or if you did not like it, these pieces of art, as I said, of human creativity, they are so rich in content. You know, their message and their stories, they have so much to say. And that could vary, like after several watches. And that has been the point of my last two episodes, to, through me, make an example of it, make me an example of having a different perspective to different movies. Just the previous week was like a little bit more like, I don't know, horror oriented, and like, but anyways, and this is like a more transcendental, spiritual, emotional sense, if you can call it like that. But dude, that is the awesome part of movies, the awesome part of science fiction, and hopefully the hopeful part of being human. But anyways, that's another week. How many before the end of the year? 1.5. Well, two, 1.5. Whatever, man. Who knows what 2026 is gonna bring? Who knows what we will have to hold on to keep going? But regardless, do not despair. There surely is something you can hold on to that will keep you afloat. Let's just not make it a book about God that only a few can understand, or like, let's not make it exclusive. Don't hold on to bullshit, just hold on to each other, I guess. Thank you for listening, and if you don't hear from me from the next year, perhaps the mothership took me home. If not, we'll see you next week. Thank you for listening. Bye bye.